Get your filthy hands off that binder!
Victor Grant slammed the table.
Who let the help touch our documents?
Brianna Sullivan stepped back.
I wasn't.
Shut your mouth!
Derek Ashford didn't look up.
You smell like bleach. You're stinking up a $2 billion room.
I'm just serving coffee, sir.
Then serve it and crawl back to whatever hole you came from. A black maid wandering around from tracks. Tumultuation contract.
14 men laughed. Brianna set the tray down.
He's lying in that contract, Clause 9.
The laughter died. Warren Cole's face went white. What that maid knew about Clause 9 would cost every man at that table everything. 3 years earlier, Brianna Sullivan had arrived at the Cole estate with a garbage bag full of clothes and $60 in her pocket. She was 25 then, thin, quiet, the kind of woman people look through on the street. The hiring manager had asked one question. Can you clean a 12,000 square foot house by yourself? Yes, ma'am. That was it. No background check, no references. No one at the Cole household cared where a maid had come from. They cared that the marble floors stayed spotless and the crystal didn't streak. What nobody knew, what Brianna never told a single soul in that house, was that 2 years before she picked up her first mop at the Cole estate, she had been sitting in a lecture hall at Howard University School of Law. 3rd year, top 5 in her class. Professor Whitmore, the toughest contract law instructor in the program, had once held up her exam paper in front of 200 students and said, "This is what excellence looks like." That was the semester her mother collapsed. Grace Sullivan had worked 3 jobs for 19 years to keep Brianna in school. Overnight shifts at the hospital laundry, weekend cashier at a grocery store, Tuesdays and Thursdays cleaning office buildings downtown. Her body gave out the way a bridge gives out, not all at once, but in pieces. First the back, then the kidneys, then the diagnosis that emptied every savings account they had. Stage 3, renal failure. The bills came faster than Brianna could open the envelopes. Insurance covered a fraction. The rest was a wall of numbers that grew taller every month. Brianna withdrew from Howard on a Tuesday morning in March. She remembered the exact weight of the pen when she signed the withdrawal form, heavier than anything she had ever held. She worked 4 jobs that first year: night janitor, grocery stocker, weekend dog walker. And then the listing appeared online. Live-in housekeeper, Cole residence, room and board included. She applied the same day. The salary was modest, but the free housing meant every dollar could go straight to her mother's medical fund. The Cole estate sat on 11 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut. Warren Cole had built it the year his real estate empire crossed the $1 billion mark. He was 62 now, silver-haired, square-jawed, the kind of man whose handshake could fund a hospital wing. Self-made, grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, drove a cab at 17, built his first property deal at 23 with borrowed money and a forged confidence he didn't yet deserve. Cole was hard, demanding. He fired people the way other men changed ties. But Brianna had noticed something in 3 years of invisible proximity. He never raised his voice at the kitchen staff. He left $100 bills and Christmas cards for the gardener. Once she saw him sit on the back porch at 2 a.m, reading letters from his late wife and crying without sound. Warren Cole was not cruel. He was guarded, and he trusted the wrong people. Chief among them, Victor Grant, lead counsel for Cole Industries, Yale Law, class of '94. Victor had a corner office, a 7-figure retainer, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He treated the household staff the way a man treats furniture, useful, replaceable, beneath acknowledgement. Brianna had watched him berate a 19-year-old caterer until she cried, then pour himself a scotch and forget the girl existed. Then there was Derek Ashford, CEO of Ashford Capital Partners. He had flown in from London 3 days before the signing, tailored everything, cufflinks that cost more than Brianna's annual salary. He spoke softly, which made people lean in, which made them miss the blade in every sentence. The merger had been 18 months in negotiation. Coal industries, commercial real estate, mixed-use developments, a portfolio spanning 9 states, would merge with Ashford Capital's European holdings. The combined entity would be worth $4.6 billion. Coal's board was ecstatic. His lawyers had signed off. The champagne was already on ice. Nobody asked the maid what she thought, but Brianna had spent 3 years cleaning Warren Cole's private study. She dusted the shelves where his legal binders lived. She vacuumed around the conference table where draft contracts sat open overnight. And every night, after the house went dark, she read. Not because anyone asked her to, because she couldn't stop. The law was still in her blood. And Clause 9 was about to prove it. The morning of the signing, Brianna ironed her uniform twice. She knew she would be in the boardroom, not as a participant, but as furniture. Carry the tray in, set it down, disappear. She arrived at Cole Tower at 7:15. The boardroom on the 52nd floor was already being prepared. Fresh orchids on the credenza, leather portfolios at each seat. The contract, 214 pages, bound in navy blue, sat at the head of the table like a sleeping weapon. Brianna arranged the espresso cups in a precise half circle. Her hands moved on autopilot. Her eyes did not. She had seen earlier drafts of this contract, pieces of it at least, pages left on Cole's study desk, sections printed and abandoned near the kitchen recycling bin. Over the past 4 months, she had read enough fragments to understand the architecture of the deal, the asset transfers, the governance structure, the earn-out provisions. But she had never seen Clause 9 before today. The binder at the head of the table was open to page 14. Brianna tilted her head, just slightly, the way a person reads a menu from across a restaurant. The language was dense, layered, built to be skimmed and ignored. She didn't skim. Subsection B, paragraph 3. A reversionary interest clause. If coal industries failed to meet a revenue benchmark within 18 months of closing, all voting shares would transfer to Ashford Capital. The benchmark? 340% revenue growth. Brianna's stomach dropped. 340% in 18 months, in commercial real estate. It wasn't ambitious. It was fiction. No firm on earth could hit that number in that window. The clause wasn't a safety net. It was a trap door, designed by someone who knew the target would never be met, designed by someone who wanted to steal a company without firing a shot. She read it again, then a third time. The language was deliberate, buried inside boilerplate indemnification text, sandwiched between standard liability caps and force majeure definitions. Someone had designed it to hide in plain sight. The doors opened at 8:45. They entered in waves. First, Cole's internal team, 4 vice presidents, the CFO, 2 assistants carrying backup binders. Then the bankers from Ridgefield Morton, navy suits and platinum watches, moving with the quiet confidence of men who charged $400 an hour to nod. Then Derek Ashford. He walked in last because he wanted everyone to be seated when he arrived. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body that morning. His cufflinks caught the overhead light, platinum, engraved with the Ashford family crest. He shook Cole's hand with both of his, holding it 1 beat too long. Warren, today's the day. His accent was mid-Atlantic, not quite British, not quite American, engineered to sound like old money. Behind him, 3 lawyers from Ashford Capital filed in. They carried matching briefcases and matching expressions, polished, rehearsed, unreadable. Victor Grant took his seat at Cole's right hand. He opened his portfolio, uncapped a Mont Blanc pen, and scanned the room the way a man surveys a kingdom he believes he built. He had led the legal review. 43 attorneys across 2 firms had spent 6 months vetting the contract. Victor had signed the final approval memorandum himself. He had not read Clause 9 carefully. He had not needed to. Ashford's team had drafted it, and Victor trusted draftsmanship the way some men trust God, completely and without examination. Brianna stood near the side wall with the backup espresso carafe. She was supposed to be invisible. She was supposed to refill cups and leave, but her pulse was hammering against her ribs. The words from Clause 9 burned behind her eyes. Reversionary interest, 340%. Transfer of voting shares. She had to tell someone. She had to tell Cole. She took one step toward the table. Victor's head snapped toward her like a dog sensing movement. "Where do you think you're going?" "Mr. Grant, I need to speak with Mr. Cole. It's about the—" "You need to stand against that wall and do your job." His voice was low, surgical. "Touch that table again, and you're out of this building in handcuffs." The room didn't react. Nobody flinched. A maid being spoken to that way was not an event. It was background noise. Brianna retreated, her back pressed against the wall. Her fingers gripped the carafe handle until her knuckles ached. Derek Ashford leaned toward his associate and murmured something. The associate covered his mouth, grinning. Then Ashford turned to Brianna and spoke loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Sweetheart, if you're going to eavesdrop, at least pretend to be useful. My cup is empty." Scattered laughter rolled across the table. A banker shook his head. The CFO studied his shoes. One of the vice presidents whispered to the man beside him, "Cole really lets her in here?" Brianna walked to Ashford's seat. She poured his coffee. Her hand was steady. Her jaw was locked so tight she could feel her molars grinding. "There you go," Ashford said, still not looking at her. "See? That's all you're qualified for. Pouring things, scrubbing things, knowing your place." His associate chuckled. Victor Grant didn't bother to suppress his smirk. She returned to the wall. 14 men in that room. Not one of them had looked at her like a person. Not once. Warren Cole sat at the head of the table, reviewing the signature page. His pen, a vintage Mont Blanc that had belonged to his father, rested between his fingers. He flipped to the final page, the execution block. 2 signature lines. His name was already printed beneath one of them. "Shall we?" Cole looked around the table. Nods, murmurs of approval. Victor Grant gave a single, confident thumbs up. Cole uncapped the pen. Brianna heard the click from 12 feet away. A small sound, the kind of sound that ends empires. She thought about her mother, Grace Sullivan, lying in a hospital bed, kept alive by machines paid for with mop water and silence. She thought about the withdrawal form at Howard, about every night she had spent reading legal documents by the light of her phone in the servants' quarters, teaching herself what 3 years of law school had not finished teaching her. She thought about Professor Whitmore holding up her exam paper. This is what excellence looks like. That girl was still in there, standing against a wall, holding a coffee pot, watching a man sign away everything he had built. And she was the only person in the room who knew it. She couldn't do it. She couldn't stand there and let it happen. Brianna set down the carafe. She stepped away from the wall, and she opened her mouth. "He's lying in that contract." The words hit the room like a gunshot. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The hum of the air conditioning became the loudest sound on the 52nd floor. Brianna stood 3 feet from the wall, her hands at her sides, her chest heaving. She hadn't planned the words. They had torn out of her the way a scream tears out of someone watching a car wreck in slow motion. Victor Grant was the first to react. He stood so fast his chair rolled backward and struck the credenza. "Security, get her out, now!" 2 guards appeared in the doorway within seconds. They moved toward Brianna with the mechanical certainty of men who had removed people from rooms before and expected no resistance. "Mr. Cole," Brianna's voice cracked but didn't break. "Clause 9, Section B, Paragraph 3. Please, just read it." "She's lost her mind," Victor said. He waved at the guards. "Remove her." A guard gripped Brianna's arm. She didn't pull away. She didn't fight. She looked past the guard, past Victor, past Derek Ashford's frozen smile, and locked her eyes on Warren Cole. "The reversionary interest clause," she said. "If you sign that contract, you lose voting control of your own company in 18 months. The benchmark is 340% revenue growth. It's impossible. It's designed to be impossible." The guard pulled her toward the door. Her shoes dragged against the carpet, leaving 2 faint lines in the pile. Derek Ashford leaned back in his chair and crossed his legs. His face hadn't changed. The same polished calm, the same half-smile. But his fingers had stopped moving. The pen he had been turning between them was still. "Warren," Ashford's voice was silk. "Are we really going to let the cleaning lady derail an 18-month negotiation? She probably read a headline on her phone and thinks she's a lawyer." Laughter. Thin, nervous laughter from men who wanted to believe the joke was funny. Cole hadn't moved. His pen was still uncapped. His eyes were on Brianna, being pulled toward the door by a man twice her size. And something in his expression shifted. It was small, a tightening around the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. The look of a man who had built a billion-dollar empire on one instinct, knowing when something didn't add up. Stop. The word was quiet. Cole didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. The guard froze. His hands stayed on Brianna's arm, but his feet stopped moving. "Let her go." Victor's mouth opened. "Warren, this is—" "I said, let her go." The guard released Brianna's arm. She stumbled slightly, caught herself, and straightened her uniform. Her heart was slamming so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Cole set his pen down on the table. The click echoed in the silence. "What did you say about Clause 9? The room held its breath. 14 men, 3 lawyers, 2 bankers, and a billionaire, all waiting for the maid to speak. Brianna swallowed. Her throat was dry. She could feel every pair of eyes on her skin like heat from an open flame. "Page 14, she said. Clause 9, Section B, Paragraph 3. There's a reversionary interest clause tied to a performance benchmark. 340% revenue growth in 18 months. She paused, steadied herself. In commercial real estate, the industry average annual growth is 4 to 6%. That benchmark isn't a target, Mr. Cole. It's a trap. Silence. The kind that fills a room when everyone realizes they might have made a terrible mistake. Cole's hand moved to the contract binder. He flipped past the signature page, past the schedules, past the exhibits. Page 12, 13, 14. His index finger traced down the page, past the indemnification header, past the boilerplate, into subsection B. His finger stopped. The color left his face the way water leaves a cracked glass, slowly, then all at once. His jaw tightened. A vein surfaced at his temple. He read the paragraph again, his lips moving without sound, his finger pressing into the page hard enough to leave a mark in the paper. The CFO shifted in his chair. A banker loosened his tie. Across the table, one of Ashford's lawyers reached for his briefcase, a reflex, instinctive, the way a man reaches for a life jacket when the deck tilts. When Cole looked up, he didn't look at Brianna. He didn't look at Victor. He looked at Derek Ashford. And Derek Ashford, for the first time that morning, was not smiling. Cole's voice came out low and flat, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Victor, did you review this clause? Victor Grant leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and pulled the binder toward him. His eyes scanned page 14 with the rapid confidence of a man who had already decided what he would find. It's standard acquisition language, Warren. Reversionary interest provisions are common in mergers of this scale. They protect the acquiring party against underperformance. 340%, Cole said, in 18 months. Victor blinked. The benchmark figures were provided by Ashford's actuarial team. We reviewed the methodology. You reviewed the methodology. Cole repeated the words the way a man repeats a lie he has just caught. And you thought 340% revenue growth in commercial real estate was reasonable? Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His fingers found his Mont Blanc pen and began turning it, a nervous habit Brianna had noticed 100 times when he took calls in Cole's study and the conversation went wrong. Brianna stood where the guard had released her, 6 feet from the table, close enough to read the sweat forming on Victor's upper lip. She hadn't been invited to speak again. She hadn't been asked to sit. But Cole's eyes moved from Victor to her, and he gave a single, small nod. Explain it, Cole said. All of it. Brianna stepped forward. Her shoes made no sound on the carpet. Every man at that table watched her the way passengers watch a flight attendant during turbulence, with sudden, desperate attention. The reversionary interest clause in subsection B is tied to a performance benchmark that no commercial real estate firm has ever achieved, she said. Her voice was steady now, quiet but clear. Industry average revenue growth runs 4 to 6% annually. The most aggressive firms peak at 12 to 15 in a strong market. 340% in 18 months isn't a stretch target. It's a mathematical impossibility. She paused. Let the number sit in the room like a grenade with a pin pulled. Which means the clause is designed to trigger. The moment it does, all voting shares transfer from Cole Industries to Ashford Capital. Mr. Cole would retain his title, his office, even his salary. But he would lose control of every decision, every acquisition, every asset sale. The company would belong to Ashford in everything but name. A board member, an older man named Patterson, who had been with Cole Industries since its founding, removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. How did we miss this? He whispered to no one in particular. Derek Ashford uncrossed his legs. The silk in his voice had hardened to steel. This is absurd. He spread his hands on the table, palms down, a gesture of authority he had rehearsed in 1,000 boardrooms. Warren, your maid is reading a contract she doesn't understand and spinning conspiracy theories. My legal team drafted that clause in accordance with standard M&A practice. If your own counsel approved it, perhaps the issue isn't the contract. It's your counsel. Victor flinched, as if he had been slapped. It's not standard, Brianna said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. A standard reversionary clause ties share transfer to material breach or insolvency, not to a revenue benchmark. And a standard benchmark is set at 70 to 120% of trailing 12-month performance, not 6,000% above industry average. One of the bankers from Ridgefield Morton pulled his portfolio closer and began flipping pages. His colleague did the same. The sound of turning paper filled the room like the rustle of birds sensing a storm. Ashford's lead attorney, a tall, thin man named Caldwell, leaned into his microphone for the video conference system. If I may, this is a gross mischaracterization. The benchmark accounts for the combined entities' projected synergies, which are listed in Exhibit D, Brianna said. I read them. The synergy projections assume a 40% reduction in operating costs through consolidation. But Appendix 3 of the same exhibit lists the combined entities' fixed obligations: long-term leases, union contracts, municipal bonds tied to 3 development projects in New Jersey and Maryland. Those obligations are non-negotiable for a minimum of 36 months. She looked at Caldwell with the patience of someone explaining gravity to a man who insists he can fly. You can't cut 40% of costs when 61% of your cost base is locked. The synergy model is fiction, which makes the benchmark fiction, which makes Clause 9 a weapon. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ashford. Ashford didn't look back. The second banker from Ridgefield Morton closed his portfolio and folded his hands on top of it. The gesture was small, but everyone who understood deal rooms understood what it meant. The bank was stepping back, distancing, preparing for the moment when this deal became a liability instead of a commission. The CFO of Coal Industries, a quiet man named Douglas Hale, who had said nothing all morning, removed his reading glasses, cleaned them on his tie, and put them back on. Then he spoke for the first time. She's right. 2 words. They landed on the table like stones dropped into still water. I flagged the synergy assumptions 4 months ago, Hale said. His voice was steady, tired, the voice of a man who had been ignored and was no longer surprised by it. I sent a memo to Victor's office questioning the revenue projections. I was told the figures had been independently verified by Ashford's actuarial team. Every head in the room turned to Victor Grant. Victor's face had gone the color of old cement. His Mont Blanc pen lay untouched beside his portfolio. His fingers were gripping the armrests of his chair hard enough to whiten the leather beneath them. The memo was reviewed, Victor said. My team concluded the assumptions were within acceptable parameters. Your team concluded what, Victor? Cole's voice was a blade wrapped in velvet. That 340% growth was acceptable? That handing my company to a competitor through a hidden clause was standard practice? Warren, I assure you, don't. Cole held up one hand. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of waiting, but the airless silence of a room where something has broken and cannot be repaired. Don't assure me of anything, not today, not ever again. He turned back to Brianna. For a long moment he studied her. The pressed uniform, the worn shoes, the steady eyes that hadn't flinched once since she opened her mouth in a room full of men who wanted her gone. What else? He said. Brianna reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small notebook, spiral-bound, the cover softened by years of handling, the edges dark with use. She opened it to a page marked with a folded corner. There are 2 more, she said, Clause 14 and Clause 22. A sound came from the far end of the table. It was Derek Ashford, pushing back his chair. The legs scraped against the floor with a sharp, ugly sound. The sound of a man preparing to leave a room he could no longer control. Warren, I will not sit here and be interrogated by your domestic staff. Sit down, Derek. Cole didn't look at him. His eyes were on Brianna's notebook. We're not done. Ashford sat, and Brianna turned to the next page. Cole stared at the notebook in Brianna's hand. Spiral-bound, worn soft at the spine, pages dense with handwriting, small, precise, the kind of penmanship that comes from years of taking notes in lecture halls where every word matters. Where did you learn contract law? Cole asked. The question landed in the silence like a match struck in a dark room. Brianna held the notebook against her apron. She had carried it for 3 years, tucked into her pocket during the day, open on her bed at night, filled with clauses and case citations and questions she had no one to ask. "Howard University," she said. "School of Law. I was in my 3rd year." Victor Grant let out a short, sharp breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "Howard? You expect us to believe—" "I don't expect you to believe anything, Mr. Grant." Brianna's voice didn't waver. "I'm telling you where I learned to read a contract. What you believe is your problem." Cole raised his hand. Victor went quiet. "3rd year," Cole said. "What happened?" "My mother got sick. Stage 3 renal failure. The insurance covered dialysis for 6 months. After that, I was paying out of pocket. I withdrew from school to work full-time." She paused. The pause wasn't for effect. It was the pause of someone pressing a bruise to see if it still hurts. It did. "I've been working full-time since." Cole leaned back in his chair. His expression hadn't softened, it had sharpened. He was recalculating, reassessing, doing what he did best, reading a situation the way other men read weather. He picked up his phone. "Helen, get me the dean of Howard University School of Law, right now." 45 seconds of silence. 45 seconds in which 14 men stared at a woman in a maid's uniform and tried to reconcile what they were hearing with what they were seeing. Some of them couldn't. Some of them didn't want to. The speakerphone clicked. "This is Dean Amelia Crawford." "Dean Crawford, this is Warren Cole. I have a young woman standing in my boardroom who claims she was a 3rd-year student at your law school. Her name is Brianna Sullivan." A pause. Then, "Brianna Sullivan." The dean's voice changed, warmed, the way a voice warms when it touches a memory that still aches. "Yes, I remember her well. She was one of the most gifted students we've had in 20 years. Professor Whitmore's top recommendation. She was on track for law review before she withdrew." The room shifted. It was not a sound, it was a feeling. The atmospheric pressure of a room full of men recalibrating their assumptions in real time. Her contract law professor, Whitmore, once told the faculty that Brianna had the sharpest analytical mind he had seen since he started teaching in 1986, Crawford continued. "We offered her a hardship deferral. She declined. Said she couldn't take money she might not be able to repay." Cole looked at Brianna. She was staring at the floor. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were wet, but nothing fell. "Thank you, Dean Crawford." He ended the call. Patterson, the founding board member, broke the silence. "Good God," he said quietly. He was looking at Brianna the way a man looks at a painting he had walked past 1,000 times and suddenly recognized as a masterpiece. Victor Grant sat frozen. The blood had drained from his face in stages. First the cheeks, then the lips, then the fingertips still gripping his pen. He was beginning to understand what was happening. Not just that the contract was flawed, not just that the maid had caught what his 43 attorneys had missed, but that his career, his reputation, his 7-figure retainer, everything he had built on the foundation of Warren Cole's trust, was crumbling in real time. And the woman who had started the demolition was someone he had told to fetch sugar. Ashford's lead attorney, Caldwell, muted his microphone and leaned toward Derek Ashford. Whatever he whispered made Ashford's left hand curl into a fist beneath the table. Cole stood. He didn't look at Ashford. He didn't look at Victor. He looked at Brianna. "Miss Sullivan," he said. It was the first time anyone in that room had called her by her name. "Please, sit down." He pulled out the chair beside him, his chair's right hand, the seat Victor Grant had occupied all morning. Victor stood up without being asked. He moved to the wall. Brianna sat down, and she opened her notebook to Clause 14. Brianna opened her notebook to the page she had marked with a small pencil line in the margin. The table was quiet. 14 men, 3 remote lawyers on a video screen, and a billionaire who had almost signed away his empire, all watching a woman in a maid's uniform flip through a spiral-bound notebook that looked like it had survived a war. Clause 14, Brianna said, page 31, hidden arbitration provision. She looked up at the room. No one interrupted her. Not anymore. Standard merger agreements include arbitration clauses, but they designate a neutral venue, typically the jurisdiction of incorporation or a mutually agreed forum. Clause 14 designates exclusive arbitration in the Cayman Islands under a private tribunal selected by the acquiring party. She let the words settle. That means if Mr. Cole disputes any term of this contract after signing, he cannot take it to a U.S. court. He cannot file in Delaware, where Cole Industries is incorporated. He must submit to a tribunal chosen by Derek Ashford, in a jurisdiction where U.S. securities law has no enforcement power. Cole's jaw tightened. Victor, is this true? Victor Grant stared at the table. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was the loudest sound in the room. Caldwell, Ashford's lead attorney, unmuted his video feed. The arbitration venue was negotiated in good faith. Cayman Islands jurisdiction is standard for international transactions involving cross-border assets. It's standard for offshore shell companies trying to avoid regulatory oversight, Brianna said. Not for a domestic merger between 2 U.S. incorporated entities. There is no legitimate reason to route disputes through the Caymans unless you're trying to prevent the other party from accessing their own legal system. Caldwell's second attorney, a woman named Prescott, leaned into frame. That's a gross oversimplification. Cayman arbitration panels operate under internationally recognized frameworks that explicitly exclude SEC enforcement jurisdiction, Brianna said. Marshall versus Atlantic Holdings, 2019. The Second Circuit ruled that mandatory offshore arbitration in domestic mergers constitutes an unconscionable waiver of statutory rights under Section 29A of the Securities Exchange Act. She didn't blink. The clause wouldn't just disadvantage Mr. Cole. In a federal courtroom, it would be evidence of intent to defraud. Prescott muted her microphone. Brianna turned to Cole. Mr. Cole, if you had signed this contract and later discovered the reversionary clause, your only recourse would be to file for arbitration in a forum controlled by the same people who designed the trap. You would be fighting Ashford's lawyers in front of Ashford's arbitrators under Ashford's rules. And by the time you realized the game was rigged, your voting shares would already be gone. Patterson, the founding board member, pushed his chair back from the table. His face had gone from disbelief to something harder, something that looked like anger marinated in betrayal. This isn't a merger, Patterson said. This is a heist. The words hung in the air. No one challenged them. Brianna turned to the next marked page in her notebook. Her handwriting here was smaller, denser. She had been running out of space when she documented this one, writing by the light of her phone at 2 in the morning in the servants' quarters, while the rest of the house slept. Clause 22, she said, page 68. Buried in the intellectual property schedule, Appendix F. She looked directly at Derek Ashford. He was still seated. Cole had told him to sit, and he hadn't moved. But his composure was fracturing. The cufflinks still gleamed. The suit still fit perfectly. But beneath the surface, something was coming apart. His left foot tapped a rapid, irregular rhythm against the floor. His eyes moved between Brianna and the door, calculating distance, calculating options, calculating the shrinking number of exits available to a man whose plan was unraveling in real time. Clause 22 contains an IP transfer provision, Brianna said. It stipulates that all intellectual property developed by Cole Industries, including patents, proprietary construction methodologies, zoning algorithms, and client relationship databases, transfers to Ashford Capital 24 months after closing. The CFO, Douglas Hale, pulled his copy of the contract from the stack and began flipping to page 68. His fingers moved fast. When he found it, he read for 30 seconds, then took off his glasses and set them on the table with the careful deliberation of a man placing a final piece on a chessboard. "It's there," Hale said, word for word. "The transfer isn't conditional," Brianna continued. "It's not tied to the reversionary clause or the benchmark. It's a separate, independent mechanism. Even if Cole Industries somehow hit the 340 benchmark and retained voting control, the IP would still transfer. Every patent, every proprietary system, every database Mr. Cole spent 30 years building." She paused. Brentwood Capital versus Pacific Industrial, 2021. The Ninth Circuit ruled that non-conditional IP transfers embedded in merger appendices, rather than in the main agreement body, constitute fraudulent concealment under Delaware corporate law. The court awarded treble damages. She closed her notebook. She didn't need it anymore. The numbers, the clauses, the cross-references, they lived in her head the way music lives in a pianist's fingers, accessible without thought, present without effort. 3 clauses, she said. 3 separate mechanisms, each designed to strip a different layer of ownership. Clause 9 takes voting control. Clause 14 removes legal recourse. Clause 22 takes the intellectual property. Together, they don't just transfer a company, they dismantle it, piece by piece. And the victim wouldn't know until it was too late. The room was so quiet, Brianna could hear the ventilation system, cycling air through the ceiling vents. She could hear the faint electronic hum of the video conference system. She could hear Derek Ashford breathing, short, shallow breaths, the breathing of a man whose chest is tightening around a truth he cannot escape. Ashford stood. His chair rolled backward. His voice, when it came, had lost its mid-Atlantic polish. What was left was raw, cornered, desperate, stripped of every pretension. "I will not be lectured by a damn maid!" He slammed his fist on the table. The espresso cups rattled. A pen rolled off the edge and clattered to the floor. "This is a legitimate business transaction, reviewed by 4 international law firms. I will not have it torn apart by some... He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. Not because he didn't have the words, but because every person in that room was looking at him, and the word he wanted to use would have confirmed everything Brianna's analysis had already proven about who he really was. Brianna didn't flinch. She didn't stand. She spoke from the chair Cole had given her, with the calm of someone who had already won and knew it. "You're not being lectured by a maid, Mr. Ashford. You're being exposed by someone who reads." The sentence dropped into the silence like a verdict. Cole reached for his phone. His movements were measured now, deliberate, controlled. The movements of a man who had made a decision and was already executing it. "Helen, get me Arthur Briggs at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and call Peter Weiss at Morrison & Sterling. Tell him I need a forensic contract review team in this boardroom by 3 o'clock this afternoon." He set the phone down and looked at Ashford. "You came into my house, Derek. You sat at my table. You drank my coffee." His voice was low, almost conversational, which made it worse. "And you tried to steal everything I built, everything my father started, everything 2,000 employees depend on to feed their families." Ashford's face shifted, from fury to something colder, more tactical. He straightened his jacket. "You'll regret this, Warren. I have partners in London, in Dubai, in Singapore. I will bury Cole Industries in litigation so deep Your grandchildren will still be paying lawyers. Cole didn't blink. You just threatened me in a room full of witnesses, Derek. My CFO is taking notes. My board secretary is recording minutes. And in about 90 minutes, everything you brought into this room will be in the hands of the SEC. He leaned forward. Threaten me again. Ashford said nothing. Caldwell unmuted one last time. Mr. Cole, I strongly advise against any unilateral... Cole pressed the disconnect button on the conference unit. The screen went black. He turned to his board. This meeting is adjourned. No one from Ashford Capital leaves this building until my new legal team has cataloged every document they brought into this room. He looked at the security guard standing by the door. Escort Mr. Grant to his office. He is to collect his personal belongings and nothing else. His access credentials are revoked effective immediately. Victor Grant stood on legs that barely held him. He walked toward the door without looking at anyone. As he passed Brianna, he stopped. His mouth opened as if to say something, an apology, an insult, an explanation. Nothing came out. He kept walking. The door closed behind him. Cole looked at Brianna. The anger in his face had not disappeared, but beside it, something else had arrived. Something that looked like gratitude, trying to find a shape it could wear in a boardroom. Miss Sullivan, he said. Stay. The boardroom emptied in stages. First, the bankers from Ridgefield Morton. They packed their portfolios in silence, shook no hands, and left through the side door. Men trained to exit a collapsing deal the way rats exit a sinking hull, quickly and without ceremony. Then Ashford's team. 2 security guards flanked Derek Ashford as he walked toward the elevator. His briefcase had been confiscated. His phone had been placed in a sealed envelope by Cole's head of security. He didn't speak. He didn't protest. The fight had left him somewhere between threaten me again and the moment the conference screen went black. His associate, the one who had laughed when Ashford told Brianna to crawl back to her hole, walked 3 paces behind him. He kept his eyes on the floor. He looked like a man reviewing every career decision he had ever made and finding none of them defensible. By noon, the forensic legal team from Morrison and Sterling had arrived. 6 attorneys, 3 paralegals. They spread the 214-page contract across the conference table and began the work of documenting what Brianna had already mapped in a spiral notebook. By 2 o'clock, they had confirmed every finding. Clause 9, Clause 14, Clause 22. 3 traps, 3 mechanisms of theft. All verified, cataloged, and prepared for submission to the SEC. Cole stood at the window of his boardroom, looking out at the skyline. 52 floors below, the city moved the way it always moved. Indifferent, relentless, unaware that a woman in a maid's uniform had just saved a $4.6 billion empire from disappearing into a contract. He turned to Brianna. She was still sitting in the chair he had offered her. Her notebook was closed. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked tired. The deep, bone-level tiredness of someone who had been carrying a weight for 3 years and had finally set it down. You saved my life's work, Cole said. You know that. Brianna looked up at him. I just read what was on the page, Mr. Cole. No, he shook his head. 43 lawyers read what was on the page. You understood it. 6 months later, the world looked different from where Brianna Sullivan stood. She stood at a podium in the Howard University School of Law auditorium, wearing a cap and gown. Dean Amelia Crawford handed her the degree she had abandoned 3 years earlier, completed through an accelerated program funded by the Cole Foundation's full academic scholarship. Brianna held the diploma with both hands. She didn't cry. She had done her crying years ago, alone, in the servants' quarters, by the light of a phone screen. Today, she just held it and breathed. Her mother sat in the 3rd row. Grace Sullivan was thinner than she had been, but she was there, upright, awake, alive. The renal specialist at Johns Hopkins had stabilized her condition 4 months earlier. Cole had covered every bill, not as charity, as a debt he said he would never fully repay. Grace watched her daughter accept the degree and pressed both hands over her mouth. The woman beside her, a stranger, handed her a tissue. Grace took it without looking. Her eyes never left Brianna. Professor Whitmore attended the ceremony. He was 71 now, retired, walking with a cane he refused to use properly. When Brianna stepped off the stage, he was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't say congratulations. He said, "I told them. I told every colleague I had. They should have listened." Brianna laughed. It was the first time she had laughed without weight behind it in longer than she could remember. The legal aftermath unfolded the way justice unfolds when the evidence is overwhelming and the guilty have nowhere to hide. The SEC opened a formal investigation into Ashford Capital Partners within 72 hours of Cole's filing. Federal auditors discovered that the 3 predatory clauses in the Cole merger were not an isolated incident. Similar language, reversionary triggers, offshore arbitration traps, buried IP transfers, appeared in 4 previous Ashford acquisitions across 3 countries. 2 of those companies had already lost control of their assets without understanding how. Derek Ashford was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit corporate theft. His passport was seized. His assets were frozen. The man who had told Brianna to crawl back to her hole now spent his mornings in a federal courtroom, seated beside a public defender, because every private attorney he contacted had declined to represent him. His associate, the one who had grinned when Ashford called Brianna the help, was named as a co-conspirator. He pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and full cooperation. Victor Grant was disbarred by the Connecticut Bar Association after an ethics investigation revealed that he had received $500,000 in undisclosed payments from Ashford Capital over the course of the merger negotiation. The payments were routed through a consulting firm that existed only on paper, no employees, no office, no phone number. Just a bank account in Victor's wife's maiden name. Cole Industries restructured its legal department from the ground up. Warren Cole hired Peter Weiss from Morrison & Sterling as the new general counsel. And beside Weiss, in the newly created position of Associate General Counsel for Contract Integrity, sat Brianna Sullivan. She had her own office now, 39th floor of Cole Tower, glass walls, a view of the city she had once cleaned windows to afford. On her desk sat 2 things, a framed photograph of her mother and a spiral-bound notebook with a softened cover and dark-edged pages. She never threw it away. She never would. Cole gave a statement to the Financial Times that was reprinted in 46 publications worldwide. One line from that statement became the most shared quote in the paper's history that quarter. "The smartest person in my company wasn't in the corner office. She was cleaning it." Brianna Sullivan was never supposed to be in that boardroom. She was supposed to pour the coffee, collect the cups, and leave. She was supposed to keep her head down, her mouth shut, and her hands busy with things that didn't matter. That was the role the world had written for her. The role that poverty and circumstance and the color of her skin had assigned her the day she walked through the service entrance of the Cole estate with a garbage bag full of clothes and $60 in her pocket. But talent doesn't read the script the world writes for you. It doesn't care about your uniform. It doesn't care about your job title. It doesn't care whether you learned it in a lecture hall or by the light of a phone in a room no one important ever visited. Talent is quiet until it can't be. And then it speaks, and the room goes silent. 14 men sat in that boardroom. Lawyers, bankers, executives, men with degrees from schools that cost more per semester than Brianna earned in a year. Not one of them saw what she saw. Not one of them caught what she caught. Not because they were stupid, but because they had stopped reading carefully a long time ago. They had stopped questioning the things that looked standard. They had stopped expecting danger in the fine print. Brianna never stopped, because she never had the luxury of carelessness. When you come from nothing, you read every word. You check every clause. You trust nothing that hasn't earned your trust. That's not disadvantage. That's armor. The next time you see someone the world has written off, someone in a uniform, someone behind a counter, someone the room wasn't built for, remember Brianna Sullivan. Remember what she carried in her apron pocket. Remember what she knew that 43 lawyers didn't. And ask yourself, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Would you have risked everything to say the thing no one wanted to hear? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. And if this story stayed with you, if Brianna's voice is still in your head, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Hashtag justice for Brianna. Hashtag don't judge. Hashtag hidden talent.
So, the woman they told pour coffee and crawl back to her hole is now Associate General Counsel at Coal Industries, 39th floor, glass office, corner view. 43 lawyers reviewed that contract. Yale educate, 7-figure salaries. Not one of them caught that Brianna caught. Not because they were dumb, because they got comfortable. They stopped reading the fine print a long time ago. Brianna never stopped, because when you come from nothing, you can't afford to be careless. She carried a spiral notebook in her apron pocket for 3 years, reading contracts by full-light in the servants' quarters while the house slept. That's not luck. That's a woman who refused to let the word script be the final word on her life. And let me ask you something real. Have you ever been in a room where they already decided what you were before you even opened your mouth? What did you do? Did you stay quiet? Or did you say something no one wanted to hear? Brianna had every reason to stay against the world. She spoke up anyway. Drop your answers in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe to Veil Stories so don't miss what's next. The smartest person in the company wasn't in the corner office. She was cleaning it.